Imagine waking up 30,000 years ago feeling like a tiny mammoth is trying to escape through your jaw. There is no dentist, no anesthetic, no pharmacy, and nobody reminding you to floss. So what happens next? You might picture ancient humans waiting for the tooth to fall out and hoping the infection did not become dangerous. Sometimes that was probably all they could do. But ancient teeth tell a more surprising story. Archaeologists have found evidence that painful teeth were cleaned, scraped, drilled, and even filled thousands of years before modern dentistry. In prehistoric Italy, someone scraped decay from a tooth with a tiny stone tool. At Mehrgarh, people drilled molars with flint. Another ancient tooth was sealed with beeswax. Which raises an uncomfortable question. Was the toothache worse, or was the treatment? Before we answer that, we need to understand why ancient humans got toothaches in the first place. A toothache can begin with something almost invisible. Plaque bacteria ferment bits of food and produce acids. Those acids demineralize tooth tissue, creating caries. If the damage moves through enamel into dentine and toward the pulp, inflammation and infection can turn a small problem into relentless pain. But decay was only one route. A crack, an impacted tooth, diseased gums, an abscess, or dentine exposed by wear could all make eating, drinking, or simply existing feel like a bad design choice. Once the pulp was badly affected, clearing food from the surface could not reverse the deeper damage. The problem was now inside the tooth. Ancient teeth often worked harder than ours. Grit and food could grind their surfaces down, and teeth could also be used as tools. Heavy wear may look impressive in a museum case, but it is not evidence of a pain-free mouth. Worn enamel could leave sensitive tissue exposed, and a hard bite or repeated strain could produce cracks. Teeth preserve wonderfully for archaeologists. For the people who owned them, however, damaged teeth did not always remain wonderfully useful. The first line of defense was probably the least dramatic. Get the offending stuff out. Ancient teeth sometimes carry grooves between them, often interpreted as marks from repeated use of toothpick-like probes. A sliver of wood or a narrow piece of bone could have cleaned a gap or disturbed food packed into a cavity. We cannot always know the motive from a groove alone, and wood and bone usually preserve poorly, so archaeology almost certainly misses much of this ordinary care. The prehistoric bathroom cabinet has mostly rotted away. That missing evidence matters. Everyday cleaning may have been far more common than the rare stone tools and altered teeth that survive. Sometimes, though, the marks are unusually specific. In northern Italy, a roughly 14,000-year-old lower third molar from the Villabruna burial had a large cavity. Inside were striations and chipping made before death. Experiments showed that pointed flint tools could reproduce the pattern by scratching and levering. The interpretation is cautious but striking. Someone intentionally worked inside the hole, perhaps removing decayed or infected tissue, perhaps prying out trapped food. This was not a spinning drill. Picture a tiny sharp stone entering a tender cavity by hand. We do not know who held the tool, how many attempts were made, or how the pain was managed. No one can recover the patient's review of the experience. But the marks show an attempt to do something rather than simply wait. At Mehrgarh, in present-day Pakistan, the evidence takes a different shape. In a graveyard dating from about 7,500 to 9,000 years ago, researchers found 11 molar crowns with drilled holes belonging to 9 adults. Flint tools were involved. The repeated examples suggest a sustained tradition of proto-dentistry in this early farming community, not one person's astonishingly specific accident. But proto-dentistry does not mean a modern profession with dedicated dentists, scheduled appointments, and reassuring posters. It means a technique existed, was learned, and was performed more than once. The holes are the physical evidence. Their purpose must be inferred. We should not assume every tooth was drilled specifically to treat decay. Even so, people were deliberately cutting into molars long before anyone could offer a pleasant waiting room. Then there is the Slovenian canine, about 60,500 years old. Beeswax covered exposed dentine and the upper part of a crack. It looks remarkably like a seal placed over a damaged surface. The timing, however, sits right on the edge of certainty. The wax was applied shortly before, or shortly after death. So it may have been treatment for a living person, but that is not proven. If it was applied during life, it may have reduced sensitivity or pain while chewing. A plausible filling, yes. An unquestionable prehistoric dental appointment, no. The wax gives us an intriguing possibility, not a signed treatment record. Mechanical treatment was only part of the possible toolkit. Neanderthal dental calculus has preserved plant compounds that researchers have interpreted as evidence of medicinal plant use. At El Cidrón, evidence from one Neanderthal with a dental abscess and a gastrointestinal pathogen has also been interpreted as self-medication. That does not give us a confirmed toothache recipe, dosage, or standard practice. Still, it makes plant-based pain relief plausible knowledge. People who knew local plants intimately may have tried to soothe pain, even when they could not remove its cause. Relief and cure are not the same thing. A distinction toothache has always been good at teaching. When cleaning, scraping, sealing, or soothing failed, the options narrowed quickly. A tooth might break, loosen, be lost naturally, come out through trauma, or possibly be removed deliberately. But the evidence does not justify giving every ancient community a formal extraction service. And removal did not make every danger vanish. A deep infection or abscess could remain serious. Scraping a cavity might remove trapped food or damaged tissue, but it would not sterilize an infection or repair a dead pulp. Many painful teeth had no reliable cure. The ingenuity visible in stones, scratches, and wax matters precisely because it existed beside hard limits. Ancient care could be clever, brave, and still not enough. Who got cavities and how often depended heavily on diet. It is tempting to imagine hunter-gatherers with perfect teeth until farming arrived carrying a sack of starch. The real story refuses to be that tidy. Caries existed before agriculture and was not always rare. At Tafaralt in Morocco, hunter-gatherers living about 15,000 to 13,700 years ago had an unusually high burden. Just over half of their adult teeth had caries, and 94% of adult dentitions were affected. Plant remains show systematic use of wild foods, including acorns and pine nuts. Researchers link the high prevalence of caries to fermentable carbohydrates and food processing. Wild food did not automatically mean a cavity-free smile. Farming generally pushed caries frequency upward because many communities came to rely more heavily on starchy carbohydrates and ate them repeatedly. More fermentable material meant more opportunities for plaque bacteria to produce acids. But agriculture was not a single switch flipped everywhere on the same morning. The timing and severity varied with region and diet. Some hunter-gatherers had substantial decay, and farming populations were affected differently from one another. The useful contrast is not healthy primitive mouth versus ruined farmer mouth. It is that changing foods and eating patterns changed the pressures acting on teeth. So, what did ancient humans do when their teeth hurt? Often, they probably cleaned around the tooth and tried to dislodge whatever was trapped. They may have used toothpick-like probes. In rare cases preserved for us, someone scraped and levered inside a cavity with flint. At Mehrgarh, people drilled molars as part of a repeated practice, though the reason for each hole is not certain. One cracked canine may have been sealed with beeswax. Plant knowledge may have offered some relief. And when none of that worked, people endured the pain, lost the tooth, or faced an infection that could remain dangerous. Were the treatments worse than the toothache? A pointed stone in a cavity makes a strong case. But severe tooth pain can make an alarming idea feel reasonable. What these teeth preserve is not modern dentistry hiding in prehistory. It is something more human: observation, improvisation, and the refusal to leave pain entirely unanswered. A groove says someone kept cleaning. A drilled molar says someone learned a technique and repeated it. A smear of wax may say someone tried to protect a crack. Thousands of years later, the tools look alien. The impulse does not.